You're listening to Conservation Connection. I'm Chance.
I'm Sarah Catherine.
We're a husband and wife team running an environmental education nonprofit that's focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week, here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals working to protect our planet and ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is a collaboration with the Sun Valley Forum in Sun Valley, Idaho.
The Sun Valley Forum is an intergenerational meeting of forward-thinking professionals that come from a diverse range of disciplines.
These experts are on the cutting edge of what's happening in the fight for our future, and they've all come together at the Sun Valley Forum to share ideas and to collaborate on solutions for a greener tomorrow.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We're here at the Sun Valley Forum in Sun Valley, Idaho 2023. Very excited to be back here. You guys remember some of the awesome stories from last year. We're getting just as good content this year, if not better. And I'm very excited right now to be sitting down with Sachi Singh. She's the founder and CEO of Rootless.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just start with you telling us about what is Rootless?
Rootless is a digitally native brand. We're trying to get more people to eat and grow sustainably sourced seaweed. I truly believe that seaweed could be the future food, future farming if we do it right. So I quit my job to try and do it right.
Nice.
And what was your job prior to Rootless?
So I've spent about a decade of my professional life in the climate and ocean space, completely different world. So I was doing, work in academia, think tanks, nonprofits, philanthropy. And I just got into the doom and gloom of it all. If you're doing heavy climate work, that is the headspace that you're in most of the time. And seaweed was the first thing that gave me hope. There is a different, glorious, regenerative future of food that is out there. So I quit my job in climate philanthropy to start the company.
I think maybe it was during COVID times was the very first time that Chance and I really started hearing about seaweed as this is kind of the future of a food source. It's so easy to grow. It's so sustainable.
People were seaweed farming. We were on the app Clubhouse, which I don't know if it still exists anymore. And there were 6 rooms about farming seaweed.
Wow.
And so it's kind of exploded onto the field a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So how long has Rootless been around?
Let's see. I quit my job during pandemic, so late 2020. I will say seaweed has been on my mind since 2016. So nice. I got my master's in environmental management at Yale. And in the middle of my 2 grad school years, I spent some time in the South Pacific. This was still while I was squarely in the climate ocean space. I saw my first seaweed farm in Kiribati, which is a fascinating place. It is the most remote, least developed country in the world.
Wow.
So just super interesting country to visit. Saw my first seaweed farm, read some research around how seaweed can be sprinkled into cow feed to reduce methane emissions from their burps. And I was like, okay, let's go. This is the thing.
Which sounds like a really strange little tidbit, but is actually a massive solution to the greenhouse gases produced by cattle farming. And just a little sprinkle of seaweed completely changes the amount of methane that they produce.
And overnight, it's a pretty incredible solution. Science is still early, so we're still trying to understand what species of seaweed, what is the percentage inclusion. So now there's some interesting work being done to figure out how to commercialize the solution. But to your point, it could truly reduce methane emissions by, I think it's up to 80% overnight.
Wow. And very rarely in science do we find something that is that drastic.
Totally.
And I remember when that story came out, it's so incredibly exciting. So let's just bang out, why is seaweed awesome? For you, why is it that you saw seaweed and you're like, this is the first thing that gives me hope?
This is the hill I'm going to die on, which is true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So I think seaweed is uniquely transformative for both human and planetary health in a way that nothing else is. So a few rapid fire facts. It is one of the most nutrient dense and diverse foods on the planet. There's over 12,000 species of seaweed. all edible. You might not want to eat all of them, though. And each of them has a slightly different nutrition profile, as, a spinach and a kale have a slightly different nutrition profile. But broadly, we're talking high quality protein, dietary fiber, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, bioactives. And it's the regular consumption of seaweed that has been linked with reduced rates of metabolic syndrome disease, so cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, in communities that are eating seaweed regularly as part of their mainstream part of their diet. For example, Japan, Okinawa, parts of Korea, also where people are living the longest and healthiest lives. So there's something interesting there. I think the thing that I love so many things about seaweed, but one of the things that I love the most is it wasn't created in a lab. It's not new. It's actually one of the world's oldest foods. And it's been used as food and as a healing medicine literally since the beginning of time around coastal communities around the world. So seaweed actually shows up in mythology and folklore. You could pay your taxes with seaweed in Japan.
Wow.
Up until actually quite recently. So it is one of those things that has stood the test of time. And the medical and scientific community is just catching up to why. So there's some super interesting research around the bioactives in seaweed, for example, fucoid and fucoxanthin, which have anti-carcinogenic effects on your body, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antimicrobial. And I think that coincides really nicely with this explosion of information I think we're having access to these days, and the amount of it's been written up in mainstream media as the superfood. So this is all human health. As a food crop, it is zero input, regenerative, abundant, and nutritious, which means it doesn't require, unlike land-based food, it doesn't require water, pesticides, fertilizer, or even land to grow. So you're actually able to grow this incredible source of nutrition on water in a way that is regenerative and actually not net neutral, but net positive, because as seaweed grows, it deacidifies the ocean. It provides standing structure for marine biodiversity to thrive. There's some pretty interesting early research to suggest that it sequesters carbon. It's providing access to livelihood to coastal communities that have been ravaged by climate change and the warming waters. So, my kind of challenge to everyone is tell me one other food thing that can do all of these things.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think about traditional farming in North America, right? It's almost always monocultures that are so resource intensive in order to get a yield that is, getting you to break even or go past that, especially when we're talking about people selling their crop to groups that are buying big groups of crops. And when you compare that model to a seaweed farm, which you have way more experience with me. So can you describe, if we were to visit a seaweed farm and scuba dive or snorkel underwater, what would that look like as opposed to a cornfield?
Awesome. So actually at the forum, I gave a talk today, and the visual behind me was just the kelp forest. That is what the future food and future farming could look like. So it's glorious, it's blue, it's regenerative. But particularly to your question about farming, so there's three cultivation and farming methods for seaweed. One is wild harvest. So seaweed is abundant and kind of grows everywhere, and I'm sure people have interacted with it, on the beach. Sometimes when it floats up into onto the shore, it gets kind of stinky.
It touches their leg and they're like, ah.
Yeah. That is, to be clear, that is not the seaweed we're using in our products. But so you can go in, kind of snip a little bit of seaweed off of the plant, let it regenerate, and you can use that in your food. There's ocean cultivated seaweed, so you go a little bit offshore on boats, and you essentially plant seaweed. It grows really quickly. You harvest it, and then you do it again. And finally, there's tank cultivated seaweed, so you can cultivate it, on land in many different ways. I think the model that I've seen that I really appreciate is having the tanks be co-located by the ocean. So you cycle in ocean water to also ensure that you're not using as much kind of nutrient and input. So you're still creating like a zero input or minimal input system. You grow the seaweed and then you cycle the ocean water back. And there's some interesting work around how, because seaweed bioremediates, it actually cleans the water. The ocean water is less acidic going out than it is coming in. So it's actually cleaning the water that you're cycling back into the ocean. So I think it depends on where you would go. I visited farms in India, for example, and they do a Capophycus cultivation, which is a type of red seaweed that's made into carrageenan. And it's just a bamboo raft, it's like 4 little bamboo sticks that there's some thread that they've tied as into sort of like a tic-tac-toe board, if you will. And they just hang little pieces of seaweed on it, and it grows. So if you also think about the capital required to seaweed farm, it's pretty minimal for some species.
I kind of feel like we should start a seaweed farm.
I've thought that since we first started hearing about it. Like the idea of just like living on the coast and farming seaweed, that sounds like a great life.
Yeah,
I love it.
I think he said it years ago that we should start a seaweed farm. One thing I wanted to ask is I feel like for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, when you think about seaweed and eating seaweed, you probably think about sushi, right? So, and if someone's listening and they're like, oh, I don't like sushi, so I'm not going to eat seaweed. What other ways are we seeing seaweed being used in foods? Obviously, you said there is plenty of cultures that use it much more than we do here. So what are some of those other ways we can bring it into our lifestyles?
A great question. So I would say primarily, the consumers in the West and the US specifically are eating seaweed in the context of the nori sheets, so snacks and sushi. The interesting thing, though, is that it is such an incredible source and potent source of health. But to your point, there is some consumer aversion to the taste, flavor profile, texture, the sliminess of it. Some people don't like the briny oceanic taste. So shameless plug for what we're doing. We're actually trying to lower the barrier to entry for people who want to access the health benefits of seaweed or don't even know the health benefits, but want to integrate something that is, a nutrition powerhouse, essentially into their diet. So we launched a product last year. It's called the Daily Bite. It's a date, almond, seed, and seaweed bites. You'd eat one a day as you would a supplement, but it's all whole food, bioavailable nutrition. You'd get that super potent hit of nutrition, and we actually did pretty extensive nutrition profiling. There's about over 40 macro and micronutrients, and there's a little bit of everything. There's protein, there's fiber, there's all kinds of minerals, vitamins, but you don't have to taste the ocean when you're eating the thing. I love the taste of seaweed, but one of the design principles of the product was, how do we get everyone to access the health benefits regardless of whether you like the taste or not? So kind of zooming back out to your question, I think there's interesting ways to also leverage the flavor profile of seaweed. It's an umami bomb. It is so good when you can use it to enhance, the umami of meat or of veggies, or mushrooms and seaweed are a killer combo because they're both umami. Yeah. So I think there's some creative ways to integrate it into your diet. But if you want kind of a no fuss, no prep, dosed amount of seaweed every day, I'd say buy the Daily Bites.
I love that.
Absolutely. And first off, I want to try one of those. So
it's downstairs.
Okay.
You should let me know what you think.
Yes. I will. Well, you'll see me walking away with like a handful of them. So.
I love it.
Just one a day, I think.
Yeah. I think that's a suggestion. But the other thing is that I just always encourage people. I was fortunate enough growing up when I was about 15 to spend a significant amount of time in the Caribbean during the summers, working with the summer camp that was doing marine science and basically just getting students out in the ocean so they could care about it. And some of my all-time favorite foods are foods that I found while I was in a completely different culture that are almost unavailable to me here. And ever since that experience, I am an absolute proponent of like, go into grocery stores that you would never go to the Asian supermarket, find something that you have never heard of. And while you're standing in the aisle, Google how to use it and then take it home and do that. Like I just really encourage a diversity of diet because there's so many good foods out there that we don't ever see because it's not part of our cultural consciousness. And I think seaweed, like we just recently learned how to use kombu to make like a miso soup base, and it was amazing. And that's just a staple food for most of Korea, right? But it's the first time that we have ever done that in our kitchen. So I'd just go find some seaweed, eat it, people.
So if someone was listening and they were like, okay, cool, I want to try that. I want to go see what my store has, if they have any seaweed products, where would you direct them? Because I can imagine for me, like thinking about it, like if I go to the store and I see these different options in front of me, what should I get? Are there different products that I should or shouldn't get that have these like nutritious values? Or is it pretty much like whatever you see, any of these options are good?
Oh, such a good question. I think it also depends on where you are. You know, I definitely think I see seaweed more on retail shelves in California, New York,
Yes.
in, kind of coastal America. I haven't spent a lot of time in other parts of the country, so I'm not quite sure what retail shelves look like. But I think, to your point, just try anything. You know, it's a couple of ways that I like to use it. There's seaweed seasonings that you can use, and you can sprinkle it on your eggs or on your potatoes. It's actually a great salt substitute. It's like a super mineralized salty thing. So you could actually start to reduce your salt intake and increase your seaweed intake and just use it in your cooking.
That makes sense.
I have a seaweed cocktail recipe.
Whoa. I need a little more context on that. Give me your seaweed cocktail recipe if you feel okay sharing with our audience.
I do. Okay. It is a take on a French 75.
Oh, you're speaking my language.
Great
so
start.
So it's essentially a French 75. You would make a combo simple syrup, and then do there's actually seaweed-based gin that you're taking notes. I love it. Maybe we could do this in the show notes too, because I can send you all the recipe. But seaweed-based gin, some prosecco. Combo simple syrup, a little bit of lime juice, a little bit of saline solution, and top it up with a little bit of sesame oil.
Ooh.
And it is phenomenal.
That sounds amazing.
If I do say so myself. Actually, one of my big things is I want to do a seaweed dinner. You know, I want to have to talk about the versatility of this incredible kind of underappreciated, underleveraged crop, and do everything from a seaweed cocktail to apps to a seaweed dessert. There's a couple of fun recipes with chocolate cake and a type of seaweed called dulse. So
I love it. I want to come to that dinner.
I was going to say, so my next question for you is, what does it take to get an invite to that dinner? Because I'm so in.
We just co-created it together.
Yeah.
So I think this is a dinner.
Done.
This is a dinner party. We just have to figure out where and when.
Yeah.
Sounds perfect.
Well, we'll get back together on that, and we'll post it for sure.
So one of my other questions is, what do you see as the future of seaweed, and what needs to happen to make it more accessible, make people realize that, like, oh, you can eat seaweed in different ways and have it starting being used in like cow feed, like you said. Like, what do you see the next like 5 or 10 years looking like, and the battle and like uphill fight I'm sure you'll have to kind of work on to get there?
Oh, great question. So there was this paper that came out in Nature, so super credible, and it effectively put numbers to this question, which stated that if we replace 10% of the human diet with seaweed by 2050, we can literally change the world. Just by reducing the agricultural burden on land, you can spare up to 110 million hectares of land, which is about 2.5 times the landmass of California. You can save up to 2% of freshwater use. You can save nitrogen fertilizer. You can reduce up to a gigaton of carbon emissions per year, all while farming 1.8% of the ocean. So I honestly really started the company with this like very blind and I still have it, naive belief that like seaweed is a thing. This paper actually gives scientific grounding to this world-changing, game-changing, food systems transforming impact that we can have. So at Rootless, we're just building the path to 10. And that is actually, because this industry is in its nascency, about 2% of the seaweed that we eat in the country comes from the country. We are innovating across the value chain. So what started off as essentially a food and nutrition company, where, you know, we're innovating on like, how do we make seaweed sexy? How do we make it cool? How do we create a cultural moment under it? How do we educate consumers and bring them into this world of eating seaweed every day for, you know, all of these incredible health benefits? But once we start to hit some of our revenue goals, we start to break our supply chain because we ran out of seaweed, because we're also ensuring that we're doing all the upstream due diligence we have to do to sustainably source. So the more we kind of build and get into this industry, the more opportunity there is literally across the value chain. So we are, you know, thinking about and setting up processing infrastructure. We're trying to figure out what does sustainably sourced and responsibly harvested seaweed even mean? There is
you have to have metrics to shoot for.
Totally.
Right?
And there is no, I would go as far as to say there is no universal definition of what sustainable seaweed is. And it is a super interesting time as well, because as you pointed out, seaweed is everywhere. You know, it's starting to blow up, and we have a very short time-limited window within which we can do this right. So some of the big guys, the big food guys, can come in and just monocrop the ocean because there's huge economic opportunity we're sitting on. And I think there's a few folks who are kind of building this path to 10 that are really committed to doing it right. So it is going to be an all hands on deck. An ocean pun, all hands on deck kind of situation. We need supply chain transformation. We need a capital. So we need people who are coming in with patient capital and helping us build these supply chains, build this ecosystem. We need some kind of framework or principle around what sustainably sourced seaweed looks and feels like. We need more testing. We need a point of view on iodine, which seaweed is a great source of, but actually you could eat too much seaweed and get too much iodine. We need your favorite influencers talking about why they're eating seaweed for their health every day. So it's an all hands on deck kind of strategy. But when I think about impact, it's 2050. You know, we're building a legacy here. We're building a movement. We're participating in building a movement. I think to kind of wrap it up on a very specific call to action, as a consumer, you can vote with your dollar, right? Like, you can go out and buy sustainable seaweed products. And, you know, the way that we design this product is so that you can literally bite your way into a better food system. So you can actually individually make a difference, and it's going to take all of us.
I love it. This has been such a fun conversation. This is the first time I think that we've had this conversation on the show about seaweed specifically, and it's something that I have personally been thinking about for a long time, and I'm really glad to see market opportunity and sort of this somebody who's just so passionate about it and is like I can tell you're gonna make it happen. Come no matter what comes. Like, it's just what you're gonna do with your life, and it's really, really cool to see that. And I wish you the absolute best for it. And you ever have those things where you're like, something keeps coming back? I think we're gonna end up owning a seaweed farm.
I love this. Right? Planted a seed.
Yeah, it's just
you'll have to help us figure out how to set it up.
We'll buy from you.
Perfect. Boom.
Love
done.
it.
There we go. It's an investment.
That's your economic incentive.
So if somebody wants to follow your journey or order any bites, where can I send them?
Our website is called getrootless.com. On Instagram, we are get.rootless. You can find us. We're selling primarily direct to consumer. We're going to start to explore what retail looks like. So we're going to be on shelf very soon. And we're just getting started. We're about 1.5 years old. So lots more to do, lots more to come.
That's
well,
amazing.
Congratulations on that big step of getting onto shelves. That's incredible. Thank you so much for your time today, and I cannot wait to see what you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is lovely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts helps other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to everyone working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. See you next time.